G'day everyone and welcome to Beyond at Home. We're your hosts. I'm Corey and this is Kat.
In this week's episode, our communicator Riley will be exploring how staying in your comfort zone can be the worst thing to help you figure your faith out. And then he'll give you one thing you can do to get out of your comfort zone.
But before we get to Riley, we just want to say a big thanks for joining us, whether you're on Facebook or over on our YouTube channel. We're so glad that you're here with us, and the best thing you can do to ensure that you don't miss out on anything happening at Beyond is to either like or subscribe, so you'll be notified whenever we go live just like this.
Here at Beyond, we want to create a church that unchurched people love to attend. So whether you've been at church your whole life, whether this is your first time, or if you're somewhere in the middle, we're so happy you're here with us. And we really hope that this message can help you on your journey.
So kick back, relax, grab yourself a chalky milk, and we'll see you soon.
G'day. Hey, I don't know about you, but I felt really uncomfortable just in this season of ISO because my facial hair has just been growing at such an alarming rate. I know there's many of us that have been able to prioritize a lot of things in this tricky and kind of uncertain season. Maybe there's a lot of things that you felt like you've really been able to do as well and enjoy. But at the same time, there's some things sometimes that can cause us a little bit of discomfort or things that just leave that little niggle in our day. I know for me, when I often think about things that make me feel uncomfortable, I think about times when I definitely ended up in a spot where I was just completely frozen. I actually used to work up at a youth camp, and part of my role as a youth camp worker was sitting and facilitating on the flying fox that we had on site. We'd have this 240 meter zip line that we'd have campers going down at a pretty nice speed. But I think one of the interesting things I always found was just seeing the journey of campers as they climb up this ladder or put on the harnesses, end up at the top of this platform and then take themselves down, because there was a lot of nervous campers out there, and I totally understand. I'm actually not great with heights myself. But it was so interesting watching the campers' journey because they'd go through this stage of acceptance and denial. This stage of acceptance where they'd say, I'm ready, I'm so ready to go, can't wait. And then, oh my goodness, I can't do this, I'm not prepared, is this safe? They'd ask all the questions, they want to know all about the equipment. And it would just be this back and forth inner battle, just of fear, just this feeling of not being prepared or not knowing what could happen next. And it's something I actually totally understood. And it's something that's probably more applicable to my life now and in this season than it ever has been before. I don't know if you've ever found a time that you've put your hand up for something that you felt completely unprepared for. But if that's the case, here's what I'd say. I'd say that you've done a great job to jump onto Beyond at Home today, because this is something that we're exploring when it comes to our own faith journey. And I know for some of you, you would say that you don't have a Christian faith, and I can totally kind of understand that. You might have experiences with Christians that have completely pushed you back from this whole idea of Christianity. Fair enough. But I think we'd have to say that in some capacity, we're all on some type of faith journey. We all hold on to something or point back to something when it comes to our own faith. We all have and rest our faith in something or someone. We all place our hope in something or someone. Maybe this is a question you've been asking yourself a fair bit. If that's the case, you've jumped in at a great time, because this is something that we are unpacking today in part 4 of Figuring Out Your Faith. Come along for the ride. I think the people that should have felt most comfortable in life should have been that of Jesus' 12 disciples. And hear me out as I say that, because I know some of you might push back, but these guys were literally following around a fellow who called himself the Son of God. He literally said he was God in human flesh. Surely you'd have a little bit of confidence and comfort in yourself, or barely any discomfort at all, following this guy around as your teacher. But I think what we learn as we look at the story of the 12 disciples, this group of incredibly unqualified people, somewhat just downright outcasts of their society, these 12 people, 12 men that Jesus chose to actually spread his message of hope, we see just how intensely they actually learn about how to put their faith in action, at the same time, how intensely they learn about how to actually serve and love others. I don't know if you've ever found yourself just trying to figure out why our world is so broken, or more so, why is it that there's just so many needs in the world? Why is it that when you watch ads on TV, your heart just breaks knowing that there's groups of people that aren't getting the support that they need? And you know that there's people higher up that just aren't making the decisions to actually look after the families around you, or people that you actually care about. Maybe there's people in your own life, even in this season, that you just wish you could meet their needs, or more so, You know that they could, but you're just too frustrated and too angry at the fact that other people aren't. But maybe, just maybe, you're also in a little bit of an acceptance and denial stage because you kind of have a prompting on your own heart to do something about it, but at the same time, it's just easier to say, or it's easier to say as a Christian that, I'll just pray for them. I'll just pray about it. Like, I know there's maybe a little bit of action I could take, but what big difference will that make anyway? I think there's times where we move between the acceptance and denial, just as people, between saying, there's a need out there that I see that I can meet for somebody else, but it's not on me to do it, or I'm not prepared. I'm not ready. I can't do that. We move between acceptance and denial. Yes, there's a tension, there's a need, but we get caught up between this stage of discomfort. How can I actually practically serve them? I think one of the best ways we can go about learning about a faith journey and also just how to define it is by looking at an event in history, which, if it did actually take place and did actually happen, then it's got to be one of the greatest miracles in the world before that of the actual Christmas miracle in itself. I think that's got to supersede all other miracles. But to bring you into this event, I want to tell you how it takes place, because it actually starts off with a little bit of a bizarre start. It starts off at a time in history when Jesus' cousin John had just got his head chopped off. So it's not a great intro to the story, but follow along with me, because obviously Jesus needs some time to kind of grieve and mourn. So he decides, I'm going to jump out on this boat. He's like, I'm going to take the dinghy out on the Pine River and jet upstream just to find a remote area where I can just chill out and rest for a bit. It's funny as we look across the New Testament how often Jesus just went and found time to actually just sit and be still and sit in solitude. So that's what Jesus decides to do. He goes to jump out on this boat, but this time in Jesus' life, by what he was doing with his ministry, he'd created quite a following, and people really knew him for what he was doing, for his teachings, but also for his miracles as well. So this group of people saw Jesus heading out on the boat, and they actually begin to follow him around the lake, around the body of water that he was traveling on. And as soon as Jesus gets off the boat, there is a mass crowd of people around him waiting for Jesus. And it was a group of people who were sick, a group of people who were ill. And what we see when Jesus stepped off the boat is immediately, even though this was meant to be his time of just chilling out, of just resting, of just breathing, which I know so much of us have just wanted to do in the last couple of months and the start of the year. In this time when Jesus stepped out of the boat, he actually had compassion for the people around him. So what he did, he got out and actually started going over to people and healing them just one by one. And I know what you might be thinking, that just sounds bizarre. Like maybe you think, I just want to see like one miracle. It's really hard to comprehend the fact that Jesus is just going around chucking his hands on people or whatever and people being healed from the sick. But you know what else is crazy is that the disciples just found this so overwhelming as well. They actually came around to where Jesus was, cutting through the crowds, and they saw Jesus there and saw what he was doing. And they were just like, Jesus, like, these people have been here all day. This crowd is massive. Like, it's in the evening now, and you're meant to be here to mourn. You're meant to be here to have time to yourself. And they go over to Jesus and they say, like, teacher, Jesus, like, these people are tired, but like, Jesus, we're actually probably a little bit tired, but they're also hungry. Like, send these people home so they can go and get food. And I have a theory that maybe the disciples were actually feeling a little bit hungry. In fact, maybe they were feeling a little bit hungry, angry. And if you know what that's like the disciples had every reason to go to be talking to Jesus in this instance. They go over to Jesus and they say, Jesus, send them home so that they can go eat food. But you know what Jesus says to them? He turns to them and he says, that's not needed. He says, that's not needed. You feed them. He turns to the disciples and say, no, well, you go out, you feed them. The disciples have been scratching their head like, what are we meant to do? Just go around? Like, we don't have any food on us. Like, we just have a couple of loaves of bread here and a couple of loaves of fish. Like, what do you want us to do? Like, there was a tension and there was a need, and here's this tension. There wasn't enough food to go around for everyone. And Jesus says to them, you feed them. And the disciples reply back to him and they just say, we can't. Like, it's not possible. Like, this is all we have. We just have these fish and these loaves of bread. And Jesus turns to the disciples, and this is where it's really rich. This is where the story actually gets really rich for us as readers and listeners of this event. Jesus turns to the disciples and just says to them, bring to me what you have. Like, bring them here. Bring the fish and the loaves of bread to me. Bring to me what you have. So the disciples, they bring it to Jesus. And Jesus ends up taking the fish and he takes the loaves of bread and he blesses them. And after he blesses them, he slowly begins to hand back the bread and fish to the disciples. And as he begins handing it back to the disciples, the fish and the loaves of bread just continue and continue and continue. And this is the miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000. If you've ever heard of it before, it's the disciples hand served to a group of around 5,000 people, maybe more, of men, women, and children, of sick people, an abundance of food. You see, it just seemed impossible. How could this have happened? The disciples weren't prepared. And what we see in this event is just this learning for us, for those of you who actually call yourself followers of Jesus, not just this definition of Christian, and I mean any of us can define a Christian as anything, but the disciples as followers, as students, as pupils and learners, they're instructed by Jesus just to bring to me what you have. Bring to me what you have and what you don't know. Bring to me your hopes and your fears. Bring to me your insecurities and all the rest. Bring to me what you have and I will do the impossible. I will do something that will bring an overflow of life to other people. And so they do, and this is how we see this miracle take place. But you see, the story actually carries on, and it gets even crazier and more adventurous, because immediately, and that's an important word to know for the rest of where this story is taking, immediately, Jesus got back on his boat, right? After feeding this group of people to go again to pray. And if you're thinking, like, how does Jesus actually pray? Like, is he praying to himself? Like, he's praying to God. Is he praying to himself? Like, how does that, is it like an up, like, does he call it, is he talking with him? Like, have you ever thought about that before? Like, how does Jesus actually pray? I know it sounds bizarre, but that's what he was going to do. He's having his quiet time again. And Jesus goes to pray on this mountain across the lake, and the disciples, they head out on a boat, and these disciples, a lot of them are just keen and avid fishermen. They knew how to kind of operate and row and steer a boat, and they're out on these waters. But you see, it gets late, and it ends up getting to like the early marks of the morning when this massive storm rolls over and the boat starts getting chucked from side to the side, and the disciples would have just been feeling so overwhelmed. Things would have just been out of absolute control. And in this time where they were just exhausting their muscles, where they were just completely stuck and they didn't know what to do next, when they felt underprepared, they didn't know what would happen next, they see this figure out on the water in front of them. And the disciples kind of get up and they're like, oh, it's a ghost, like far out. And then they see, they kind of look closer and they hear this voice come back to them just saying, it's me. And it's Jesus, and he's walking on water. And again, a crazy thing, right? Like, firstly, Jesus providing loaves of bread to people in abundance. At the same time, now he's walking on water. Like, Jesus must have been amazing at swimming carnivals. He just would have been. But anyway, he's caught out and he said, it's me. And the disciples are like, Lord, if it's really you. One of the disciples, Peter, says, Lord, if it's really you, call me out onto the water. And you see, the other disciples are looking at Peter, right? This guy who's just said, Lord, if it's really you, call me out into the water. And they're thinking like, Peter, what are you doing? Like, are you a lunatic? Like, don't go walking out towards like what? And Peter's saying, no. He's like, if that is really Jesus, if that's the guy I've known for all this time, if that last lesson he just taught us back there, fellas, is true, that we can just bring to him what he has, but first we need to do what we know we can do. We just need to do what we know we can do. We just need to bring to him what we know we have. Then I need to get out of this boat, but I'm only going to do it if that's what Jesus invites me to do. And so Jesus says to him, come to me. And slowly Peter gets out of the boat. And as he gets out of the boat, he starts to walk on the water. And I'm sure Peter was probably feeling pretty good about himself in this time. Like a little bit of like just a strut on the water. He's got his eyes set on the target. He's heading straight towards Jesus. Like he has met Jesus where he's at. He's in faith has actually said to him, I'm just going to do what I know I can do, and I'm going to let you do the rest. He begins to walk towards Jesus. But as the waves kind of get bigger and the storm kind of continues to brew above him, he starts to lose his sight. And all of a sudden he starts getting more overwhelmed, more chaotic. And again, we slip into that stage of just like, oh, what's happening? I don't feel prepared. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. Slowly, Peter begins to sink underwater before his head goes under. And then in that moment, Jesus doesn't say, well, Peter, you silly duffer, like, you got to get yourself out of this mess now. Like, you got out of the boat in the first place. No, immediately, Immediately, there's that word again, immediately, Jesus reaches out his hand and pulls Peter out of the water. And he looks him in the eye and he just says, Peter, faint heart, what got into you? He says, you were doing so well. And I just always have seen it as such this proud kind of parent moment where it wasn't Jesus kind of accusing Peter of like, oh, like, why did you do that in the first place? Like, it was far from that. It was this proud parent moment where Jesus actually took the steps in the first place in faith to begin to walk towards Jesus. And Jesus has him there in the water just saying, you were so close. You were so close. You just took your eyes off it for a second. You just held back. Like, Peter, just do what you know that you can do and trust me with the rest. Do what you know that you can do and trust me with the rest. Let me do the rest of the work. And you see the parallel between both these stories, the common theme that the disciples in the first place, when it came to the loaves of bread and the fish, they just did what they knew that they could do, just literally taking loaves of bread and giving it to somebody else. It was practical. It was a practical way of service. And when it comes to our own faith journey, there's a faith catalyst that we can look at that will seriously, I believe, actually grow our faith in such an extraordinary way because it pushes us outside of our comfort zone and challenges us to think about where we really place our trust or who we place our trust in. And that's that of personal ministry. And you might be thinking, like, what even is personal ministry? Like, isn't there like ministries in like Harry Potter and stuff like that? Like, isn't there ministries in governments? Like, what's personal ministry? And really, what we're talking about is the vocation of serving other people and what that looks like. And this story, these two stories, these two kind of miracles that happen where really Jesus did the impossible actually started and was initiated by the disciples, by ordinary, in fact, extremely ordinary people doing very simple tasks, doing what they knew that they could do, but putting their faith into action. They said to themselves, I'm going to do what I know that I can do so that God can do what I know that God can do. What does this look like for us? What can we take away from it? How can this actually change our own faith journey and grow and exhaust and stretch our faith muscle? Well, let me show you in these next steps that you can take throughout the rest of your week to help you figure out faith. Come with. If you want to exhaust that faith muscle so you can see it grow stronger and longer, if you've had the questions before, this is the time to take the leap. To take the leap and actually find a practical way to serve. In fact, that's our 4 Monday for this week. And if you're wondering what a 4 Monday is, something we love to slide into the application part of our Beyond at Home experience, because we believe, what's the point in engaging with church on Sunday if it's not going to change you and impact you for the rest of the week? So here's the 4 Monday, nice and clear when it comes to that faith catalyst of personal ministry. This week, jumping into it, what would it look like for you to take the leap and to begin to serve? To begin to serve the people within your circle, within your workplace, within your friendship, within your family life, or even within the community here at Beyond as well. What would it look like for you to take that leap to serve? I think one of the crazy things I've realized after working up at that campsite and being a part of that Flying Fox experience is that for the campers who are actually climbing up the platform, we can pretty much belay them up. All they need to do is just put on the harness, and then from there on, they're just climbing up a ladder with full safety equipment and everything. But the one thing we couldn't tell them was an easy or simple task, was that first step. In fact, that was the biggest thing out of all the fear that they could have been feeling, was actually the leap off the platform. And whilst we often have so many fears attached to that leap, and whilst there's so much unknown and uncertainty to it, I think we can find such a peace and comfort in the words that Jesus actually said to the disciples when they thought he was a ghost walking on water. You see, he said to the disciples, like, guys, it's me. But what he said was, courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. So we can actually find such a peace, even in the knowing that whilst faith isn't knowing the end of the story, it's actually trusting in the one who does and trusting in the one who's in control. Maybe for some time now, you've been holding onto a lot of things, or you've been pushing back to the idea that you could possibly be the person to meet the needs or love or serve that person that you know needs to have their needs met in your circle of life. Or maybe for you, for some time, you've just felt so unprepared to even take that next step in your faith journey. Well, I want to let you know, as we're talking about this idea of personal ministry, this very well could be one of the greatest and most adventurous faith catalysts that we've talked about in this whole series of figuring out your faith. So there's the next step. What would it look like for you to actually take the leap and begin to serve those within your circles in the most practical way? Because at the end of the day, I'm sure you can think about someone in your life who put themselves in a place of discomfort so that you could actually feel a comfort. I'm sure you can think of people in your life who've sacrificed things and done things so you can actually grow into a better version of yourself. We really have every reason to do that when we think of those people. You've seen the fruit of what that looks like. So what's best for you? Is it to sit, or is it to actually take that next step forward? We all want to have a life that's characterized by how we serve and how we love and how we can be generous. And I think one of the greatest things that we see in the story of Jesus and his disciples is that all he asks of us to do is to bring to him what we have, what we know that we can do, and to actually let him do the rest. Faith isn't knowing the end of the story, it's trusting in the one who does.
Thanks so much for that, Riley. That was an awesome message. And if you guys do want to go deeper into what Riley talked about, be sure to check out our Beyond the Message podcast that will be released throughout the week.
We're going to flick over to the band who has some awesome worship for us. But if you want to hang out in the comments, have a chat, tell us about what you're doing this week, we'd love to spend some more time with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great week, everyone.
This is Perfect Love by Kingdom Culture. You are the one that surpasses all borders and time. You stepped across all the boundaries and walls in my mind. You are the one who came by the water and blood. You testified against fear and replaced it with love. Perfect love drives out fear and love forgets all the years that were stolen and were broken. You're restoring them all. Perfect love drives out fear and love forgets all the years that were stolen and were broken. You're restoring them all. You made me righteous in the image of your Son. Now I'm free from sin and the punishment of my wrongs. And I will not fear because your grace has covered it all. You are a good God and steady me so I don't fall. Perfect love drives out fear and love forgets all the years that were stolen and were broken. You're restoring them all. beloved. We are His beloved.
This is Do It Again by Elevation Worship. Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence. I've seen you move. You move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way.